I do consulting work for Whitefish Schools and for the city of Whitefish. I'm also the chair of the Sustainable Tourism Management Committee, and we've had a lot of work being done on the issues of short-term rentals, and housing really does, play into the whole tourism mix in terms of the pros and cons of what's going on.
My name's James Barnett. Nathan asked me to come. I didn't realize what this was, but I'm a local developer. We own and manage multifamily communities here and throughout the country, and we do some development, mostly here.
Well, I'm glad you're here, James, because I think it's important that we hear a developer's perspective, because I don't personally really understand how all that works, and I'm excited to hear you kind of dive into some of this stuff a little bit. I'm going to get started here with Brendan. There will be some opportunities for the panel to weigh in here in these initial questions, but it's mostly just going to be Brendan talking about the book that he wrote. You kind of covered this in your intro a little bit, Brendan, so feel free to not rehash this, but just wondering if you can go through your background a little bit, why you decided to write this book. If you feel like you already covered that pretty well. You spoke specifically about 3 cities most of the time in the book. If you could just explain a little bit more what those cities are and why you decided to focus on those cities.
Yeah, so I've lived kind of all over the place, and the first line in the book is, "This book was born from a sign in a stranger's yard," and that was when I was living in Minnesota, and I was working full time, had multiple roommates, was going without a car, but I still found it hard to make rent. And I went to New Orleans, and there was a sign that said, "Neighbors, not Airbnbs." And I thought about that because I was staying in an Airbnb. I thought it would be, if I could be more a part of the community and save some money by getting groceries rather than going out to eat. But I also saw other Airbnbs on the street, and that just kind of stayed in the back of my mind for years. And that concept of who gets to belong in a place really became front and center over the years to come. I felt that in Minnesota. I felt that kind of pull as I was new to different places, and there was a lot of tension, even backlash against other places. And then I started a grad program in Blackstar, Arizona, and saw that sign again and decided to make that my thesis topic: how do short-term rentals affect housing in Western mountain towns? But I was studying that during COVID, and it quickly became an interrogation of our entire housing system. COVID was causing housing prices to skyrocket, interest rates were incredibly low, and at the same time that everybody wanted a safe, stable place, as home became not just where you would start and end your day, but also where you spent the most of your day. Many people were getting into buying a home as their primary home, but at the same time you had second homes going through the roof, a lot of investors buying up properties, and it really created a lot of tension in that. So I was studying Flagstaff, but also studied St. George, Utah, and Bozeman, Montana, and I chose those cities as places that were the largest city in the area. They were all 3 along major highways and all within 100 miles of a major national park. And so that kind of, if there was going to be tension between short-term rentals and housing, it was going to be visible in these places.
Great. I think that does a good job to kind of set the stage for the discussion and the cities that you had focused on. I don't think that we're so different here in Whitefish, especially when we compare to Bozeman, which is just a little over to the east here in our own state. At the end of chapter 3, you state in the book, all of these places were driven by constellations of policymakers, developers, business owners, lobbyists, and many residents who were more than willing to sacrifice the affordability of housing for all in pursuit of economic growth for a few. When I read the book, this was kind of a common theme that was in the opening chapters. I'm just wondering if you can expand on that idea a little bit, talk about that a little more.
Yeah, I think you get a lot of tension between people who've lived in a place for a long period of time and then people who are coming in, and growth is good for a lot of people. If you own a house and prices are going up, that's great, as long as your property taxes are still affordable. If you own a business and you're getting more more customers in, that's good, as long as you're not being priced out by rising property costs. And the same goes down the line for so many people who, in the moment, growth is really good, but especially when you have outside investment kind of taking hold of a place, it really starts to, especially in places that have limits to growth, like Blackstar is surrounded by national forests, and when there's an influx of people with excess cash, whether that's remote workers who work jobs in Silicon Valley wages, or whether that's investors coming in, there's kind of a choice that's being made at who gets to belong in a place. And I think it becomes really tense for a lot of locals who are feeling like the place that they grew up in, that they called home, is being snatched out from under their feet. And I think it doesn't have to happen that way, but one point that I want to make clear tonight is that we get the housing system that we demand, and when we just ask for more housing, or we just incentivize more building, but we don't fix zoning laws, we don't make it clear that this is for locals in the area, people who work jobs there, residents who've been there for a long time, or give them space, then it really starts to become a displacement of those people.
And I think we'll get into that in a few questions here and kind of expand on that idea that you touched on when you said, compared to just building more housing and then focusing on zoning. And I think, maybe what you're talking about is some of the environmental impact and how we can maybe do that a little differently. And we'll touch on that in a little bit. Going to bring the panel in for your thoughts on this next one, so make sure you pay attention to this question. Wanted to talk about a concept that you present related to tourism, which I found really interesting and wasn't something that I ever personally thought about before. That cities cater to tourists in part to turn them into future residents that tend to have more money than current residents. I guess I was kind of that person, although I came out here for a job interview and was offered a job. I didn't come out here strictly as a tourist, but I can kind of resonate with that a little bit. And so wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that idea that you present in the book, that cities are catering to tourism, essentially to have increase, I guess, their tax base.
Yeah, that was something that came up again and again in my research. I interviewed a lot of elected officials, a lot of researchers, real estate agents, nonprofit planners, and Headwaters Economics, based in Bozeman, they studied this a little more in depth, and that was something that was reflected on where in the short term it might seem kind of short-sighted to favor more tourism, but if that's growing a place, and if many of those people are going to get there, and there's one interview he said they come and they look around and they're like, oh, this is pretty cool, and this is pretty cool. I get why people stay, but when you have people being incentivized to come and visit again and again, it's especially with remote work on the rise and more people flexible in where they live, it does create that tension. And I think you can kind of see that with as you travel and see advertisements for, I was just visiting my brother on the East Coast, and in New York City, there's an ad for North Dakota. Wow. Every city, every state is kind of in competition to bring in more tourism dollars, and there is that current of not just tourism dollars, but people to stay in the area.
Brian, I want to bring you into the conversation here as the representative hear from Explore Whitefish and just kind of talk about how Explore Whitefish looks at tourism and I guess the things that you all do in that realm. And if you have any thoughts on that specific idea of basically people visiting and becoming future residents and tending to have more money than the folks that are already here. And I think a lot of people in this room probably fall into that category. I'm not saying it's not putting a value judgment on it, but just curious your take.
Yeah, I think Explore Whitefish has been pretty unique in terms of really standing against any type of relocation. It's always been about, we find that geo-traveler is how it's been defined. We worked with National Geographic pretty closely 15 years ago and looked at, travelers that would come into a place like Whitefish and really leave it better, really. The Chamber of Commerce is really, the organization in town that's in charge of tourism and relocation and things like that. So in terms of tourism, it's been kind of a hard line in terms of how can we find visitors that resonate with the character of the community. Of course, there's going to be people that visit and look around and say, wow, this is sweet. There's no getting around that, but I'm very proud of the way that Explore Whitefish has looked at visitation over time and really tried to be careful about it.
Thanks for sharing that perspective and explaining a little bit more there. Anybody else on the panel want to talk on this question? I'm not forcing you to. Just want to give you a chance.
Yeah.
Cool.
I grew up in the Valley, so definitely grew up surrounded by a lot of sort of that negative sentiment around new people moving in. And I think the longer that I've been here, I have sort of realized that I was lucky enough to grow up here, and I can't really begrudge anyone else for moving here as well. And the origin of a lot of those negative sentiments, I think that when you have a housing supply that's fixed or fixed for relatively affordable types of housing, smaller apartments, things like that, it creates a very zero-sum mindset where any good thing, any growth for a community, any new amenity creates more competition for the same supply of housing. And that mindset of exclusivity is downstream of sort of the economic reality that we aren't building the right types of housing, we're not building enough of it. And I think that that's sort of the origin of a lot of this sentiment that you really do get here in Montana more than other places. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Thanks for adding that in. Daniel or James, anything to say on this? Cool. You may. I'm going to ask for you to talk on the next one, so listen to this one. Moving on to chapter 6, you talk a little bit about inclusionary zoning, stating that officials make deals with developers fast-tracking the approval of luxury condos so long as 10% are listed at what's considered the fair market rate for those who make 80 to 100% of the area median income. Whitefish currently has a voluntary inclusionary zoning program that allows developers to take advantage of certain incentives when providing these affordable units. That voluntary program currently requires only 10% of homes to be affordable, but we sometimes see more, and we've seen up to 30% recently. We at Shelter WF view this as a good thing because these affordable homes otherwise wouldn't be built, or they'd be built very, very slowly, which is the case. And Daniel, I might have you speak to that point as well. We also believe that mixed income communities are incredibly important for building a strong community, and having that mixture of incomes within the same community is really important to us. Can you talk about your point of view on this issue as you presented it in the book?
Yeah, I think the voluntary inclusionary zoning programs and incentivizing more affordable development is great. I think it matters a lot how it's done. So a lot of times there's a sundown period. Okay, do this for 10 years or 15 years, but then homes revert back to whatever can be gotten for it. And it's when locals are forced to compete on a global market, which all of these forces are kind of doing. So whether it's short-term rental visitors, whether it's second homeowners, not all remote workers, but a lot of remote workers who make well over the median wage, or just investors looking to buy up property with the knowledge that it'll keep going up. Locals are going to lose out every time. And I think it's really hard to ask developers to say, oh, we need to, like, will you voluntarily make 10% of your units $1,500 less per month than what you could charge for it. And so it's asking a lot of developers, especially when the other developers in the community are going to do the same thing, or there are other plots or other communities that they can do that you can look at. And so I think that's where it really needs to be a coordinated effort to acknowledge that housing is not just a commodity, it shouldn't just be available to the highest bidder, because without that mixed income community, things kind of start to falter. So you start paying more when you go out for pizza, when you go to the store. You need to drive further and further away to get from your rental into town. You need to, if you own a business, it's harder to recruit workers. There's all these things that really start to impact people on a daily basis when the community becomes built more around exclusivity rather than inclusivity.
Thanks for explaining all that. James, I want to bring you into the conversation here. This is one of the reasons I wanted you to be here. I think that in Whitefish particularly, we asked a lot of developers. I'm wondering if you can go through and kind of summarize why it's difficult to provide more than 10 to 20% of homes as deed-restricted affordable homes. Yeah, I did want to touch on what you said. In Whitefish, our deed restrictions are relatively permanent, or are permanent, so they don't expire quickly like that, thankfully. But yeah, James, wondering if you could just touch on that from a developer's perspective. Why is that difficult when we ask the private developer? When we say, like, why aren't you putting 50% affordable in your apartments? Why aren't you?
Well, I think inclusionary zoning can be a good thing. The reason developers don't include more is financially you can't afford to do it. The free market, if you could afford to do 50% affordable, then the next guy would do 49, and the next guy would do 48. The free market would determine that's what you would do. I think what you have to be careful with inclusionary zoning is what I've talked about is this gap in the middle. Somebody's going to pay for these developments. And if you restrict a certain number below market rates, essentially you're losing money. Somebody's going to pay for it, and where you're going to pay for it is in those other units. Unless somebody's just philanthropic and willing to lose money developing, which doesn't happen. So I think it would be a good thing. The LIHTC program, which I don't know if we're going to talk about, is the most successful affordable housing program probably in the United States. Costs the U.S. around $10 billion a year. Not that much, right? And that program could be expanded, but that one also is limited to 60% generally and below. And so, okay, let's say you're at 60% and you can find a place to live, or you're at 150%. There's vacancies in the valley right now you can rent. But if you're in that middle, there's nothing for you. And that's kind of the thing you have to be careful about, I think, for petitioners.
Yeah, I think that is a good point. I certainly classify as one of those people that, had I not been able to buy a house in Whitefish when I did, I couldn't buy my same house for the same price. Right now, I couldn't buy it for $200,000 less because of interest rates. And I was just fortunate with timing there, and I don't qualify for a deed-restricted home. And so that's kind of what you're speaking to when you're speaking about that middle that is kind of missing. I think I want to ask you just another clarification here, I guess. Just generally speaking, you don't have to get way down into the weeds, but why is a developer not able to fund 50% affordable units in a developer? Like, how does the funding for development generally work in the private sector?
Easy question.
Would you like to take this? Well, I think the view of development, and I have not been in development forever. There's people in this room with more experience than me. Development, of course, can be profitable. There's a long list of bankruptcies associated with development too, and we're probably approaching one of those times. Interest rates affect everybody, not just home buyers. Construction loans right now are probably pushing 9-10% to build, so it's very expensive to develop. And real estate is interesting in that nobody's been able to corner the market. BlackRock might, go to State Street, but for the most part, it's fairly efficient, and there's enough competition that you have to sharpen your pencil. Even in this valley, there's 8 to 10 developers sufficiently sized to compete with me, for sure. And so we do have to still compete with each other. And so rents get set at a price that is obviously still profitable for investors, but there isn't the margin to do massive amounts of being restricted before land is very expensive here. What's that?
You just can't make enough money to your mind.
Or negative money. We have bank loans, right? We have financing, we have to pay those bills. When I first met you, I remember we sat down, I opened up a spreadsheet, and I said, here's how development works. And land's expensive, labor's expensive, materials are expensive. If we could offer more affordable, people would do it.
But how much are you making in terms of percent? Let's say you're making 35%. Couldn't you make 33?
Oh, who makes 35%?
Not even
Who makes
close.
15%?
How much do you make it negative? Or
4?
Yeah, I mean, it's, with current interest rates, single digits, low single digits.
it seems like there is a percentage.
I know, it doesn't seem like it does.
It seems like there's 1% somewhere.
It's-
I would love to speak to this.
Yeah, please do, come on. We'll allow it. One of those guys has more experience than we can.
Hi, Casey Moll. I've been working with several. I've been working with several of the committees here in town on affordable housing, and one of my mantras is I think we need to change the terminology. Housing simply is not affordable. That's a fact. And it isn't born on the back of the builder or the developer. I think in this group we participated in, hired a group of consultants who came in, and there were 3 metrics that were incredibly stunningly important. The first one was in the valley, not just Whitefish, but in the Flathead Valley, the average cost of the house right now is $750,000. A term you referred to earlier was percent of. That metric is AMI, average median income. So in this valley, average median income is around $60,000. So to your point of this gap, but that gap, there's not even a gap, is a quick calculation, and this is prior to the interest rate hikes, is at 250% of average median income. A home buyer is $250,000 short of qualifying for a mortgage for the average price home. That's mind-boggling. And then I did the quick math. There's a need for 3,500 affordable units in Whitefish in the next 5 to 10 years. The gap there financially is $500 million. Who pays for that? It's not the builders. It's not the developers. Those are tough businesses with small margins. And when it's good, yes, you can make some money. And when it's bad, you can lose your shorts. And one of the things I did in every meeting we met was address that question. It's not a choice for me. I mean, I cannot build a home that fits in the affordable rate. It's not possible. I mean, I would have to subsidize it personally. And the other interesting thing, and the good thing in this whole curve, is when I first came here in 1992, a good carpenter was making $10 to $12 an hour. They're now making $50, $75 an hour, which is a good livable wage. But what that does is just raise the price of that house. And on the inclusionary zoning thing, we pointed out the problem is the developers subsidize those units with the other units that then just raises the average price of the next house or unit or apartment or whatever. It is a very sticky problem, but I do think we need to look at it differently. It needs to be subsidized. I think the question is how and who subsidize that housing. The other one I'd like to speak to just quickly is, in this beautiful gem of a town that we've created, in my mind and experience, there's no intentionality behind trying to lure people here. We've created something beautiful. And whether we invite them here or they come on their own, there are a certain amount of people that are attracted to it and they want to stay. And we can't fault any of them for that. Most who choose to stay because of the people that they're surrounded with and are really good people and have contributed to the community. But we are missing, I truly miss the days where you go to the Great Northern on a Friday afternoon and the banker and the lawyer and the carpenter and the house cleaner and the painter, everyone's there together. They know each other. They don't care how much money they make. That mix, that fabric of this community that has changed. And housing is a big part of it. So I'm not here to give you any answers, but I do think part of coming to that solution is truly understanding the problem and not pointing fingers and blaming builders and developers and government. It's just a really sticky problem. And we'll figure it out. We've got to start with the right information and facts. So thank you for that.
Okay, Casey, thanks for adding that to the discussion. I'm going to give the mic to James, and then we're going to go to Daniel next. I forgot to preface with this, but I did want to preface with this. You're probably going to hear some things tonight that you don't agree with, and I think that that's a good thing. I'm trying to facilitate a discussion that gives a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah, I think just an example of with the current market and profitability around development. We had a development in Fort Myers, Florida, which is outside Tampa, one of the hottest markets in the United States for sure. We were going to build on that land a couple months ago. We went out to 100 lenders up and down the East Coast. We had 2 offers for financing. That was 100% market rate, which wasn't profitable. We couldn't finance it. And you're seeing that a lot in markets like that, Austin, these bigger, hotter markets, because of the costs. Even with the rents, which I think are absolutely absurd. I don't know how anyone pays it. It's not profitable. We just can't borrow money, so we want to live. So the big profit margin, it does come and go, and it can be profitable at times. It's not there right now.
And I think that that's an important point because this what you just described, I guess, is where the private market fails for sure. Is when interest rates are high, when profitability is low or non-existent, we fall behind on building homes that we're already behind on building. And I think that Daniel represents. I forgot I turned it up for Casey. Daniel represents an organization that is capable of filling that gap. And I guess the question I want to ask you, Daniel, is what are the major challenges that you see in creating 100% affordable housing? Like, why is it so hard? Why does it take so long? And is there a better way to marry private money, maybe to public money, to build more of that faster?
The real example, we were at a bank today speaking with some lenders about our project. Our project just right over the viaduct, right behind Piggyback Barbecue. It's 0.6 acres. All the utilities are right up to the site. We're going to do 18 units. The project cost for that's about $4.4 million. All right, so to build that, that's the first part. we're trying to do it. We have an application to the state for 95% in AMI and lower, essentially. So we're talking about folks that are close to the 100% AMI. If we get this loan from the state, which is in the threes, it's the Cold Trust Multifamily Program. Thank you, Representative Fern, for that program. It's really great lending, right? So if we can do that, we'll be able to borrow a whole bunch more money. If we don't get that money, we're going to have to raise about half the project cost in equity for us just to be able to develop that property. So when we say, well, we need to develop that, we're a nonprofit, so we're going to be asking the community, we're going to be writing grants, we're going to be looking for all sorts of money out of the community to raise $2.5 million just to bring half the equity to build the project. So that's just like an example here of like where those margins are. You know, if you bring the rents lower, right? So if we're trying to target folks that are at 80% of the median income, we're just going to have to raise more money or take on more debt on that project, and it just gets really hard really fast. And I think for us as a nonprofit, we're able to go to the community and ask for assistance and charitable donations. And for the private developers, there's maybe some private equity, but there's people that want a return on that investment. And so that's just part of this, is how do you maintain the margins for the folks that you're getting the money from. And then just those interest rates are very real, and how that pencils out for a project. So that's just our example today. One of the, as I mentioned, was House Bill 819, the Cold Trust Multifamily Homes Program, brought in $65 million for affordable housing. And it's actually a really good gap. It fills a gap. A lot of the federal housing standards, it's like 60% median income or lower, or even up to 80. But as we've just kind of gone through this, thought exercise, that doesn't pay for the full cost of the development at those rates. So this program will go up to, as I said, 95% of the AMI. So 75% of the units have to be 95% of the AMI or lower. Okay, so that means you can do 25% that could be market rate to help to subsidize some of those. So I do think that there needs to be some of that creative financing, especially from the government, to help if there is going to be a wider range of income served, and really just recognizing that this problem extends beyond just the low and extremely low income that maybe the housing authorities or folks that are on housing choice vouchers. Those are the folks that are not making much money, really struggling to afford to actually, really in poverty. So,
How many units is that project?
It'll be 18. So it's hard.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention is there's a floor at what you can charge. If you're trying to turn a profit and the land costs $100,000 to start with, you can't sell that property. Or if you're building on property and it costs that's a fixed cost. It's already lost once you buy that land. And one thing that's really important to talk about is that when we talk about developers or builders, it's not a monolith, and they're oftentimes local developers are competing with larger buyers of property, like BlackRock, like all these buyers, and they have unlimited funds. They have unlimited reach. When they see a market going global that's hot, they'll buy up properties, and that's why across the country you're seeing in Orlando, in Charlotte, in Austin, in Phoenix, which a few years ago was named one of the most affordable large cities. You're seeing in a quarter, investors are buying up to 25-30% of all single-family homes that are going on the market, and that's really putting a dent in what you can do, because it drives up the cost for all builds that come after that. Because if those homes are going to be sold for more, and property is going to be worth that for anyone who's buying that land, it's going to be harder to build it for them. So you see this movement toward building bigger homes for people who can afford bigger homes, 39% of all housing units, all single-family homes built were considered starter homes, 1,400 square feet or less. 20 years later, 2001, that number was 15%. 20 more years later, 2021, that was 5%. And so if you're trying to buy a home, you have to buy more homes than you need, than you want, but that's just the only option that's available.
Is there an example of a locale, a zip code, a city, and a tax structure that has aggressively thwarted that shit?
That's a great question. I think there's a growing pushback against like outside investors, and I think that's something that really needs to be seen like statewide or regionally, nationally even, because a lot of communities get locked into this competition where they need a certain amount of property tax. They need these high income earners to buy a property. They need homes to continue to be built. And if that's no longer profitable, then the town starts to shrink. All the services start to go away, and people who might have moved to that town move to the one next door. And so when we think about the issues, we can't see it in isolation. And so when one town puts up a flood wall to stop this outside investment, it just goes to the town next door, and it can create these cycles of investment, extreme investment and extreme disinvestment, both of which can be kind of ruinous for the town.
Yeah, I also think the other strategy, other than saying, okay, well, we can't have outside investors, we can't have equity, which creates like sort of a large host of problems for any type of development. You can also go look at reports, investor reports from places like BlackRock, and say, okay, what do they see as their risks? And if you go look at their SEC filings, they're saying one of their risks is that you see municipalities get much more open to building more housing, and restrictions on supply start to loosen and prices start to go down. So when I think about cities that have been relatively successful, not in stopping outside investors from buying homes, but stopping those investments from being profitable to the detriment of the community, I'd say maybe Minneapolis with the 2050 plan they did, which is a lot of zoning liberalization. Other areas like that, I think, can be really successful, not in stopping the investment, but in making it not a very good investment.
In other words, there's a way to do it that benefits local residents, doesn't benefit the outside investment.
Yeah, I would just say basically you're trying to bring down the cost of housing, and when that investment is predicated on those housing costs continuing to rise, well, it's not going to look like a very attractive market anymore.
Awesome. I didn't expect that discussion to go on so long. I really opened a can of worms with that one. One more question until we get into the bulk of the panel discussions here that kind of relates to zoning and houses getting bigger and that sort of thing. Just wondering, Brendan, if you can touch on the environmental impact of our housing system kind of at large. How do our development patterns play into that environmental impact, and how can we improve that on a society and local level?
Yeah, this really gets into zoning rules and laws, and I think there's a lot of people who always have a seat at the table when it comes to housing issues, and so that is developers, the real estate community, that are local politicians, business owners, a lot of times in tourism markets in places like Whitefish and Bozeman, Blackstar, but it's also homeowners, and it's really built into the way that we've designed our housing system, and this has a lot of racial implications as well. That's a whole other topic. That's really a big portion of the book is the history of housing and the racial segregation, economic inequality that we face today, and a lot of it is seeing housing as an investment opportunity personally. When you move into a house, you want the value to go up in price, and that's one of the main reasons cited against rezoning, allowing duplexes, triplexes, multi-unit properties, accessory dwelling units, all those things. And it has extreme environmental implications as well, because when you design this where people have to move further and further out because you're not infilling or you're not building up, everybody's going to need a car to get into work. They're going to work in a place set apart from where they live, because this area is for homes, this area is for economic opportunity. And that didn't used to be the way that we saw zoning in the country until the early 1920s. Zoning was exclusively for reasons of safety, for hygiene, things of that nature. But you really had a shift where there was a Supreme Court ruling in Ohio that said multi-unit apartment buildings come very near to being a nuisance. And you have this, the social implications where suddenly you have enclaves of the wealth over here and enclaves of poverty on the reverse side, but you also had communities being pushed further and further out. And environmentally, that's a catastrophe, because you have people just more and more separated from where they work, where they eat, where they recreate, and I think it creates this aesthetic of environmentalism, but it's at the expense of the actual impact.
Thanks for going into that a little bit more. Wondering if anybody else has anything on that before we kind of move forward into the panel discussions here. It's kind of all been a panel discussion, but.
I think it goes towards values, and a lot of people, I mean, if you drive across the valley, you see the ranchettes, and I referred to them as weedettes recently, and I had to think about it for a moment, but a lot of those properties out in the middle of the valley are just filled with weeds. They're not actually, a farmable land. It's just kind of an acre lot that's filled with weeds. I think we look at it with the septic crisis in the county, on where are we putting that waste, and just what do we value? I'm pretty new here in the valley, so the things that I hear are like, we value open spaces, we want to maintain corridors for wildlife, we want all these things, but at the same time, we're just building further and further into our wildlife corridors, further into our farmland, further into these areas that just further fragmentation on these lands. So I think it's really that values of, if we do really want to, as Montanans, preserve our open spaces, preserve our wildlife corridors, clean water, all these things, we're going to have to start thinking about what does it look like to live a little bit closer and not just develop everywhere. Because soon enough, if we just continue on this pathway 10, 20, 30 years down the line, the whole valley is just going to be subdivided into small little ranch homes. And I think that's good for some people, but I think in terms of the environment, comes at a real cost.
Thanks for sharing that, Daniel. We'll move into the later part of the book now that kind of goes through some solutions, I would say, and also actions that are both collective and individual that we can take personally, or that people can take when they go other places, that sort of thing. Breaks it down into a bunch of different categories. So we're going to start off with the tourist category, and some of the solutions that I picked out of that section include, this is an individual action, I guess, if I was going to, is that how you classify it, I guess? Okay. Yeah, so I think that this is more of an individual action, falls under that. Always be friendly and treat servers, park rangers, staff members, locals, and other guests with respect. That's the first one. And I guess the second one's kind of an individual one as well. I'm wearing the hat that was created by our local food bank here, who is always in need of volunteers, and they're incredibly busy because they don't put up a lot of barriers. If you're hungry and you need food, you can go get food. Our food bank in Whitefish is amazing for that, and it's some of the most fulfilling volunteer work that I've ever done, and there's a lot of different things you can do, whether it's delivering food to people or that sort of thing. something that I think is starting to spread through the tourism industry, based on the conversation I had with Julie, but you can maybe speak more to this, Brian, is this second solution, which is researching local organizations and address community needs and volunteer at one. What do you think of those two things I brought up? What else do you feel is important?
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, the Friend of the Fish campaign that we launched in 2019, I think banners are still up around town right now in terms of, be a steward of the land, treat your workers with kindness. I mean, Be a Friend of the Fish campaign has been a cornerstone of a lot of what Explore Whitefish has done. Coming through the COVID time period, it was especially important to remind people we got crushed with visitors. Some were not so welcoming and nice to the people of our town, and so we had to stand up and kind of come together as a community and say, this is what we believe in, this is who we are. When you visit Whitefish, this is sort of how we expect you to behave. Also, education-wise, I mean, we had visitors that were coming in. Jeff Mao at Glacier National Park used to talk about just these visitors to Glacier that had never been in an outdoor place like this and just didn't really know how to interact with wildlife, how to do anything. I mean, we hear the stories of bear spray, we hear all the Toron stories, and some of them unfortunately are true. What was part two there? Remind me on part two. Yeah. So the volunteerism side, I think it's a great point. I think we can do more in that regard. I think we're still searching for ways that we can encourage visitors to do something cool. We do have this idea where we would get visitors and locals to do a planting session of white bark pine up at Whitefish Mountain Resort, where do something together as a community. Could also involve visitors. The visitors that we are trying to attract are looking for that type of way to re-engage. I mean, it's certainly a trend in terms of volunteerism. I think we can do better, and we're searching for those solutions. Right now, Explore Whitefish is going to make an announcement pretty soon in terms of the 1% that it collects from restaurants around town and member businesses. It's really going to tap more into housing right now, just as a way to get more involved. Right now, we have put seed money into housing Whitefish to get those guys going. But I think you'll hear some cool news about what Explore Whitefish is doing for housing, which is what we're talking about right now.
Great, thanks for adding to that. It was something I had to say, but I think it slipped my mind at this point. I'll just move on. The next group, I don't know if it's the next group. The next one I picked out, next group in the book here in that section is short-term rental hosts. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I'm going to go back to the tourist thing. That first one that I read, always be friendly and treat servers, park rangers, staff members, locals, and other guests with respect. I think we think of that as people coming to visit us and those people doing that when they come here. I think that all of us, and it can be hard after the pandemic, but all of us also need to be friendly and welcoming. Because if you just alienate people, then they're going to say, screw these people, I'm going to do whatever I want. When I first came to Whitefish, and the reason I'm still in Whitefish, is because of that welcoming community and the friendliness that I experienced. And that really helped me to integrate into the community and to understand the community. And I think that we've lost some of that recently, and I think that we need to kind of get back to that on our end when speaking about people who are visiting. Moving on to short-term rental hosts, some of the things that are in this section, actions. The first one here is do not rent out spaces that are not in your primary home. I love that one. The whole home. You talk about this a lot in the book, but whole home Airbnbs and basically everything moving to that versus what Airbnb started with, which is just renting out some spare space in your room. And that's how I got through grad school. My last year, to be honest, is renting out an extra room in our place. I might have you talk about that a little bit, Brendan, just the issue that you present in the book where most of these short-term rentals are whole home rentals. So as a short-term rental host, not doing it unless it's just sharing in your primary residence every once in a while is one solution. If it's legal, of course, I'm not saying that that's legal everywhere in Whitefish. And pushing for legislation that puts a tax on non-primary homes being rented out. on a short-term basis. Who wants to speak to this? Brendan, I think I'll pass it to you first, just so you can talk about that trend that you talked about in the book with some stats, and then pass the mic to whoever wants to speak after that.
Yeah, that's Airbnb kind of became the darling of the sharing economy, where people love talking about them and you have empty space. Why not make use of that? And you've seen that filter into everything with cars as well. And that's not the way it is anymore in most places. So I haven't looked at Whitefish recently, but for Blackstar, St. George, Bozeman, many of these tourism-centered economies, it's around 90% of all short-term rentals are the entire home. And around half of those are rented out for more than half of the year. So these aren't just people who are leaving for the weekend and renting it out. It's people who, it's not people who live there at all. It's an empty property, and it's directly causing a jump in housing prices. One alternative I wanted to bring up, it's not, as far as I know, it's still not active in the U.S., but it's called Airbnb.coop, and it's a website, an organization that started out in Europe, and what they do is they only allow people to rent out one property, and so it's usually their primary home. There are examples where you can rent out like a duplex next door and stuff, but then a significant portion of the money from that goes back to the community. So it's in terms of tourism, volunteerism efforts, it's really kind of like striking that balance. So it's not getting people out volunteering, but it is bringing money from tourism directly back to community efforts.
I think the challenge with the short-term rentals just goes back to the economic realities of the highest and best use of a piece of property. And so when you can essentially get what you would get from a long-term rental in 3 or 4 nights on a property, I mean, that economic incentive is very high if you're looking for an investment. So I mean, that's just one of those things that I think on the regulatory side is really just going to we're going to have some hard conversations. I think there's going to be a lot of pushback from property owners that own those properties saying, this is our property and we can do what we want with the property that we purchased. So I think that's going to be the main fight around control over the short-term rentals. And I mean, I think it just gets back to that reality of how much money can you make each night. And so until there's either a proliferation where we just say, hey, we'll allow them anywhere, and people are going to make some bad investments, and we're probably going to incentivize people to build more Airbnbs, and that's going to flood the market, and the price will hopefully go down, and then we'll have more housing stock, potentially. So that's one way, is just deregulate it totally, and see where it goes, and hope it crashes. So there's no easy answer there.
I was going to add in, I was just told that in Bozeman, they're voting on a resolution in the next 2 weeks that will severely restrict the entire country from outside. So it can be done.
I think the deregulation of short-term rentals would be a complete disaster. We need to retain the integrity, and I know you say this kind of facetiously, certainly, but it would be an utter disaster. We have a state legislature that isn't allowing local control in a lot of regards. Dave Fern's always got our back, I know, but we have to be very, very careful. We have a citizen of Whitefish right now who's suing the city of Whitefish over such an issue. Super dangerous. I encourage you to research that. We got to be super careful from a tourism perspective. The short-term rentals thing has taken control away from lodge owners and bed and breakfast owners that invest in their properties, have managers on site. And I think Outside Magazine published a story 10 years ago how Airbnb killed the mountain town, and it could still happen.
Yeah, good thoughts. Thanks for adding those, you too. Speaking of the state legislature, I think the last 2 sessions they have tried to put a bill through to fully deregulate Airbnbs in the state, and it's failed miserably both times. I personally think the only way that we're going to get any movement on that is to create a citizens initiative that will cost a lot of money because Airbnb will spend a whole lot of money fighting that one, to just allow cities, enabling legislation basically to allow cities to restrict them in certain ways. I don't think like any sort of ban is going to go anywhere, but having that enabling legislation that allows cities to do it, that is a little bit more untouchable, I think, is kind of the way that we need to go if people are interested in that. Next group of people that we're going to talk about here is government officials and things that they can do to help out with housing affordability. Some of the solutions that are presented are in here, are some of the solutions presented here in the book, and the first one that I'm reading as we're going through an update to our growth policy and a lot of public engagement is one that I really appreciate. Gather the opinions of residents, especially listening to those who tend to be silenced or marginalized. Do not expect them to come to you, rather go to them. And yeah, that's what I would like to see our city do during this growth policy update process is get out of City Hall. Send the staff out of City Hall. Send them to the bar. Send them to like wherever else. So it's a festival somewhere. Because there are a lot of people that will not go to City Hall. Like City Hall is not a fun place for a lot of people who aren't nerds like me. So yeah, I really appreciate you putting that solution in. Second one. Really fun for you? It is, yeah. I'm here. Second one is push for different. Was the other one. Second one is make larger changes, create agreements between cities and state or federal governments that share the cost burden of making the system-wide changes necessary to achieve a more sustainable housing system. I want to ask you specifically, Brendan, first before we take it onto the panel about that second one. And there's a period after we make larger changes. Wondering if that is meant to stand alone. I feel like cities can be at times a little bit too incremental or too afraid to do something transformative for the housing system. And I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who have an incentive in the housing market going up in price, and government officials, it makes their job easier if you have more property taxes coming in. It makes it easier when you have businesses growing and the economy going, but the people who don't get heard from are the ones who are being pushed out, and the ones who don't feel like their voice would be heard if they showed up at City Hall, or don't even have been so divorced from the process that they're left out. And so I think that kind of gets into what I talked about before, is that so many places are competing against each other. I mean, it's this larger theme about individual versus community. And I think that happens with individuals in homes, and individual households, but it also happens at the city level. And governments will try to incentivize growth at all costs. And the cost is that people are pushed out from that community, and the problems, the environmental issues, the fragmentation of the community are pushed to the town next door that maybe can't put up a fight against those things. And I think you see this kind of, I really dug into the kind of the boom and bust cycle of the West, talking about ghost towns and boom towns, and tourism is supposed to be a block against that. But in many cases, it can perpetuate those same cycles, because we end up, cities and cities get dependent on those same cycles of economic growth to the point where tourism or outside money in all areas starts to edge out the people who actually live in the place. And that's where I think some places are struggling to grow, and they could use some of that growth. They might not have the hotel infrastructure, and they might like more short-term rentals that could boost the tax base in their area. But right next door, there are areas that are really struggling against it. So one of the big things is giving local control, but with cities, with localities having a mindset that what's good in their area or bad in their area ripples through the entire region.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said about sort of this idea of city officials, especially in these community meetings, respond to incentives, they respond to who shows up, and they respond to who has power. And the community input system is not just broken for housing, it's broken for all sorts of stuff that we need to do in the next few generations to create a better world, like better interregional transmission for electricity and stuff like that, for public transit. All of these run into the same problem, which is that community input is incredibly underrepresented. It has very specific people that it benefits, and when it comes to housing, that's a lot of property owners that have the time to show up, that have a vested interest in seeing really their retirement go up over time and be able to build their life around that. That's a valid perspective. It's not the only perspective. And I really want to see a transformation in the way that we consider community input. The most protected way to have input in your community is a ballot box. And I think that over time, if we give city officials the latitude to make decisions that we elected them to make, and then if we don't like their decisions, we vote them out of office, there might be problems if they make decisions we disagree with, but those problems of action are better than the problems of just, paralyzed inaction that we see in the status quo. So I think there's a much larger discussion about what type of community input we really value.
All right, going to move ahead a little bit here before we get into some last one in this sort of category that we've been going on for a little bit before I get into some of the other solutions presented that don't relate to these collective or individual actions. Speaking in terms of landlords, developers, and investors, some of the solutions you present in this section that are in the book are, first one is, why not help sponsor a child care center on the ground floor of an apartment building offering reduced rates to residents? Why not help start a car sharing service for residents of a high density building? Helping to solve one of the biggest hurdles to high density building, parking. James, I'm going to toss it over to you. What do you think of those? What other ideas do you have, I guess, in that realm?
I'm not sure that parking is as big of a barrier here as it might be in other markets. I'm trying to think of a place where that's been a limiting factor, maybe downtown or something. But most of these developments have quite a bit of land with them. As far as sponsoring a child care center, yes, I mean child care is needed everywhere. It's not just housing. We could use 10 more of them, I think, for 20 or 50 of the dollars.
If the carers had some place to live.
Yeah. Just the thoughts on those two solutions that were presented, which I picked out of a list of more, but those are the two that I decided to pick out. I've got other questions to ask too, but did you want to speak on that one? So I want to move on to chapter 14 and two solutions that are presented there that I think are important to discuss. The first one's community land trusts, also known as CLTs. Wondering if Keegan, since you were working for the Northwest Montana Community Land Trust, our local land trust here, if you can kind of describe that model, discuss some of the benefits and challenges of that model to kick us off.
Yeah, community land trusts are great. So the model with the community land trust is they own property throughout, so the Northwest Montana Community Land Trust throughout the valley.
What's the tax benefit on a community land trust?
The tax benefit? Well, it depends. It's unique here in Montana. But basically, the owner, like whoever buys the property, so you get somebody between normally 80 to 120% AMI, so a lot of that middle income that we see a lot of gap. They buy a house, but the land remains with the land trust. So because the land is with a nonprofit, they get tax benefits as well. And then the other nice thing about this system is they own the home. They have a regular mortgage, and when they sell it, they're able to sell it for only a certain portion above what they bought it for. So they see some equity benefit, but then it's sold to another person in that 80 to 120% AMI range. So the goal with this is that it retains affordability, not just for the first sale, which is what you see with a lot of home ownership affordability programs, is the first person that buys the property gets a windfall, and then over time, it just becomes a market rate property, but you sort of see continuing affordability. So
People from out of state buying our land, the land trust.
not as much, no. For us, we have a restriction that if you're buying a community land trust home, you have to have been working in the community for something like 2 years. So I don't see that as much, at least in the land trust that I work for. What was that?
What's a dollar for dollar annually?
The what?
On a land trust.
Sorry, could you clarify?
The dollar for dollar tax write-off for a land trust. If you were to invest in a land trust here,
There's no. Yeah, there's no. Oh, yeah, this is different than like a conservation land trust. So there's no outside investment, and it's not. So conservation land trust, yeah, there are some tax benefits if you like donate a property, then you're able to write that off. Community land trusts are normally a lot smaller lots and don't take any investment. It's mostly donations of like small dollar donations, and then like government benefits as well. So I think it's definitely a component of the larger housing solution. Again, working at the land trust, there's obviously we're subject to all the same impacts that someone like a developer is, which is the cost of land is high, the cost of building is high, and that means the amount of donations we need even to build one new home is quite significant, right? So we are subject to those same zoning restrictions that impact how many people we can put on a lot, even if it's donated to us. So it definitely is a really cool solution because it has that continuing affordability. It allows people to stay in a community over time. So yeah, they're great. You can donate to the Northwest Montana Community Land Trust as well as all these other organizations.
The thing with land trust too, and I know Keegan mentioned this, but it takes the cost of the land out of the transaction, right? So if the land is not being included, so if you look at your tax bill, what's the taxable value of the land? What's the taxable value of the improvements? Folks are just buying the improvements. So if the land cost is $75,000, that's just going to stay with the land or with the land trust. So it's really the models that shared equity, and so there's land trusts, there's cooperatives, and these are just solutions that people don't necessarily think about a whole lot, but they, it's outside the box. It's not a traditional home ownership. People aren't gonna, flip the home and make a whole lot of money. So there is a lot of education that has to go into it. But these models, they do work. They do maintain affordability. And when you think about it, if somebody's renting, when they move, they're not getting any money back. But if you are in a community land trust, you might not be, appreciating the full market value, but you're getting your money back plus, a good amount, potentially up to 25% or 3% per year. So they're really cool models.
Yeah, and Daniel just made me think of another great thing, which is a lot of times this is for people who have been renting. For the land trust here, you have to be a first-time home buyer, and it is sort of those starter homes that you see. So what you were saying, which is the price and the amount of starter homes, it's not like it used to be. We definitely see that with the land trust, where we're sort of holding on to a lot of these smaller starter homes that we can sell for a relatively affordable price. So yeah, that first-time home buyer component is definitely what you like to see from trying to build wealth in a more sustainable way.
All right, I think I want to go through two more questions before we wrap up, just so we kind of stay at that hour and a half that we had planned for the discussion. Another solution presented in Chapter 14, and Daniel, I'll probably kick it over to you after I read this one. It discusses mixed income public housing, meaning housing that contains both market rate and below market rate homes, typically more below market rate homes than are provided through inclusionary zoning programs, like what we talked about earlier. The goal being to recoup costs rather than to maximize profits. So just having enough market rate units in there to cover the costs of the development. I personally would like to see our local housing authority, you're not the housing authority, you're adjacent to the housing authority, but I'd like to see our local housing authority and our city kind of move in this direction, because I believe that it would help us build affordable housing a lot faster, while kind of having a perpetual funding mechanism through those market rate units for the housing authority and maybe Housing Whitefish if Housing Whitefish was involved. Curious what everyone's on the panel who wants to speak about this, what your thoughts are on that, and Daniel, I'll start with you.
mixed income developments? Is that generally
Mixed income public housing.
mixed income public housing?
So like maybe 50% affordable.
Yeah.
No profit involved. Really have to have private money in it. But is that your sense of explain it?
Yeah. So mixed income public housing. The way that we see public housing in the U.S. is very much a product of the way it was written back in the 1930s, and homeownership was going through the roof. People were buying homes and being subsidized to buy homes, and public housing was seen as a check because the market was not building affordable housing. So that's been a long-term thing. If the price of land and all these things are going up, and there's more money to be made in building homes, that's generally what the market will do. And so public housing was made a check on that, and it was stipulated that all people living in public housing had to make significantly below the median income in the area, and it doesn't have to be built that way. In many other countries around the world, it's built more like this mixed income model, where maybe you have a third of people above the median income, a third around the median income, a third significantly below. And it doesn't have to be a money sink. It can pay for itself because it has the money it needs to make the necessary repairs and make the changes to maintain the property.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ultimate question is, do we want more housing to be built by housing authorities or by private industry or developers? And I think that's just kind of where it lies, is who do we want developing? So I mean, yeah, I think that there's obviously room for more mixed income through public housing. At the end of the day, it's just really who do we want to build? And I think public housing generally gets a pretty bad rap. People don't necessarily want to see more public housing. So I think it's partly just breaking down the barrier on rethinking what is public housing, how do we want to conceptualize it, if you will, and how do we think about mixed income communities. I think a lot of people just when we talk about affordable housing or workforce housing, people just say, oh, it's just for people, poor people or people in poverty. And I think there's just always this immediate perception when we talk about public housing or lower income housing. I think people probably just think of, you get the image in your head of whoever you think is, going to be living in those units, and not the people that are sitting next to you here tonight, and your neighbors and your friends. So I think it's really just thinking about how do we think, broadly about public housing. We want more of it. Who's owning it? Who's paying for it?
Can I just interject for a second? What underlies a lot of this is the concept of these taxes. Who's doing them? Who's collecting them? How are they collected? How are they exempted? And when it comes to housing, the mortgage deduction is a uniquely American concept, and which was designed to promote property, personal property, home building, private home building, not public building. So, that together with the leasehold concept of you don't own the land, you own the building on it, you own your apartment on it, kind of like a co-op thing. Those two things are really important about the way we all think about property. In Europe, people will rent their entire life and not feel like second-class citizens.
So everyone can hear back here.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much.
They're not second-class citizens just because they rent.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your name?
Ron.
What was that?
Ron.
Okay, Ron brings up a great point here, which is he's basically saying that what underlies a lot of this is the tax system that we've set up. And he brings up what, in my opinion, is like a very invisible part of the housing system and funding for housing, which is the mortgage interest deduction. This was created to subsidize home ownership, and
the price of programs like the mortgage interest deduction and other support for home ownership is almost twice total federal dollars for rental support in like Section 8 housing, LIHTC, other programs like that. So we subsidize home ownership an insane amount in this country, and it's not really talked about. And then we talk about how much money we're giving to public housing, how much money we're giving to public developers. Meanwhile, there's this invisible massive amount of money that's being funneled mostly to higher income people that can afford a home. So, as he brings up, there's obviously a lot of historic stuff around race that impacts this too. But yeah, great point there. And it's worth bringing up when talking about how we don't have enough money to fund rental assistance programs or to fund publicly built housing. You know, we spend a lot of money just subsidizing your average 30-year mortgage.
Guys, can I just say something real quick? You guys, super lucky to have me in here. Hey everyone, my name's Adam Huntington. Hey everyone, my name's Adam Huntington. I'm actually an educator from the University of Southern California in urban planning and development, one of the top schools in the country. And I also work in real estate finance and real estate. Can I just see a show of hands? How many people have their W-2s, pay stubs, and tax returns on an electronic file ready to go right now? Ready to go, send your mortgage lender. You're ready to go and you're ready to refinance right now. You're ready to buy a house. Your kids are ready to buy a house. Anyone? Okay. All right. On that same note, you guys. You know what? I actually apologize. I promise I wouldn't talk up here.
What's your point?
Never mind. I apologize. Got some stage fright.
Thanks for coming up anyway.
You know, one of the things I talked about during one of our proposed developments was one of the risks of LIHTC and these types of things is creating this new segregation around socioeconomic class. And you see towns do this, where they'll go, well, we can put them over there. The lower income people can live over in this area, but not over here. And one of the things we were trying to do was create a community where you would have this mix of the deed restricted units within market rate, and nobody would know where those were or who that was. And I really think that's a pattern we should shoot for. But the current, especially with LIHTC, it really isn't set up to do that. And if you were to expand LIHTC, which you could do, and the government can do what it wants, you could do something like that, to where then you could move up and down through that. You wouldn't lose your housing if you got a better job. You would just move up and down within that system, and it promotes an interaction throughout the society. Just something to be mindful of.
Yeah, I mean, we as an organization definitely find that very, very important to do that. You got it?
I got it. Okay. I got rid of my stage fright. I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm so sorry. Anyway, I am very knowledgeable on this stuff. I work with affordable housing in the city of San Diego for a very long time. San Diego Housing Commission is one of the biggest affordable housing entities in the entire country. And they absolutely failed our city. Absolutely failed it. San Diego City, Los Angeles, Southern California, it's the worst homeless epidemic you've ever seen. San Diego is known as America's finest city, and it has absolutely been destroyed by homelessness. And the biggest cry from everyone there is for affordable housing. And that's not what it's about. It's not about affordable housing. It is, but there are bigger entities at play here. And like I said, San Diego Housing Commission, we give a significant amount of our tax dollars to this commission. They have more than $40 million worth of assets. $100 million worth of assets, $40 million in cash. $40 million of cash. They're just sitting on it. So I recommend everyone really think wholeheartedly about everything that's going into fair housing. Affordability is not just the local players. There are a lot of investors that come into town. they buy properties here, whatever, Airbnb, but they're also paying locals to clean the property, maintain the property, etc. There's a lot of local investment that goes back into these things. There are bigger forces at play, and it's not just the locals and your neighbors that may be buying the second house or whatever. But what I'm saying is that the point is that San Diego Housing Commission is sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars worth of property. And affordable housing, just because you're calling it affordable housing, you're not getting the appreciation on the back end when you buy the property and you try to sell it. Anyway, I'm done. Thank you.
Glad you got over your stage fright and were able to share your experience there. I think that there is something further to further this discussion a little bit. That that subsidized money is not very effective when the housing is not more affordable, and the housing doesn't get more affordable, kind of unless we're able to build more of it and more of what we need, right? And so it all meshes together. And so I've got one more question before we break here. Before I let Brendan close on his book. And I think, Ron, it speaks a little bit to kind of what you were talking about here. But in the book, you point out that there are a few states in the West. It's the highlighted one. I highlighted it and I still couldn't find it. The book discusses different property tax rates for residents and non-residents. That is, generally double property taxes for non-residents who own homes. Starting the law in Idaho and Utah, I believe, correct? It's the law in Idaho and Utah. Yep. What do you all think of this idea on the panel? Brendan, I'll let you provide a little bit more background there first. I think that it does kind of attack the subsidy that we get for mortgages, especially when somebody's getting a second mortgage or a third mortgage.
Yeah. So, in the example that I was citing in the book, in Utah, so St. George, Utah was one of the 3 cities I originally studied, and roughly 1 in every 5 housing units, especially single-family homes, are non-primary homes. So they're not owned by people who live there, at least for most of the year. And many of those are held onto as assets because the market will keep going up in price. Many of them are just vacation rentals, vacation homes for people, or rented out as properties, and they can pay off their mortgage on that one. And I think Utah has this tax incentive program. It's actually a tax exemption, the way they frame it, where if you're a primary homeowner, you will pay a reduced tax rate. You'll pay half of the set rate for everyone. The flip side is that if it's a second home, you're going to pay double. It's how you frame it, which I think was done very intentionally for Utah politics. But I think that really gets into a larger issue that we know what a lot of the problems are, and that's also the source of the solutions. And so when you talk about taxing, when you're talking about incentives, or talking about where the money comes from, it should come from the problems and stem directly to the solutions.
Summary.
I will at the end here. So we're getting close to the end. I guess I want to thank our panel for being up here. You guys don't need to stay up here at this point. Brendan and I will just close, and then Daniel, I'll bring you up to talk that at the end. But thanks panel for participating. And then, Brendan, I just want to give you the opportunity here before we close to kind of wrap everything up. Was there anything that we missed that you really wanted to touch on in the book, or just a wrap up of the book in general, why people should read it, that sort of thing?
Yeah. First off, I think one thing that people ask me a lot is, are you more or less hopeful from writing this? And there's oftentimes a phrase attached to any social or political issue. If you're not angry, you're not paying attention. And this does make me really angry. People are losing a sense of the place where they grew up. They're wondering if there's a place for them. They are being forced further and further out, forced to spend more of their money toward housing instead of having kids, instead of going to school, instead of putting it towards savings or starting a business. And that should make all of us angry. But I would tweak that and say, if you're not hopeful, you're not paying attention as well, because there are so many really great organizations working on this, and when it comes to changing the way that we see housing, it starts from people being really engaged in the conversation. So this was really great. I want to thank Nathan and Shelter WF for having a conversation. $5 of every book will go toward back to Shelter WF, and it's really impressive the work that they're doing. So I encourage people who do live here to get involved in Shelter WF and just talking to their neighbors about housing issues, and start thinking personally, what can I do on this issue, and how can we raise our voices and unite together around it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for reaching out to us and for agreeing to do this event. Hopefully it was a little bit different than the other ones that we've done so far on the book tour. If you have questions about Shelter WF, we have a table over there with some information. You can talk to my partner Mallory here or me afterwards. I'll go hang out over there. I want to talk about all the blue and orange signs that you see over there. If you're a Whitefish city voter, in addition to electing our city council and mayor in November, there's also a ballot initiative on there to reallocate some of our resort tax funding, which is funding that is primarily coming from our visitation economy and from our tourism economy that people pay on things when they go to the restaurant or when they get a beer. 23.33% of that funding is becoming available because the Haskell Basin bond that was dedicated to will be paid off January 1st, 2025. The ballot initiative is to reallocate just 10% of those funds, and the other 13.33% is going to go to roads and that sort of thing, but taking 10% of those funds towards community housing initiatives. That can mean anything from development to programs like rental assistance, down payment assistance, property tax relief, whatever the city council decides is the best use of that funding, which amounts to a little over $1 million a year, anticipated $27 million over the next 20 years. And so that's a ballot initiative that we as an organization are very supportive of, and we urge you to vote yes on that this November. Daniel, did I do a good job? Oh, and there are signs over there if you want one to stick into your yard to show your support as well. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. This was super fun for me to do up here and lead this panel and talk about this book. Feel free to mingle with us kind of afterwards and ask questions on a one-to-one basis. I don't want to make everybody stay here and do a Q&A back and forth, but yeah, feel free to kind of mingle with each other and with us, and thanks again for coming. Thanks to Ron for bringing the jackasses here tonight.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I get into, like, right now people, the only
Whatever you want, whatever.
got that. Yeah. Down the road. Oh, right.
The agency. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, my training. I got here. I agree with Yeah, I love it. I work credit for it.
Oh, you did?
So I traveling close to like
the next 3 hours?
Yeah, I will.
Hopefully you have a sleeper.
I can fall asleep.
Nice to meet you. Your flag.
Yeah.